Imagine you're driving home after a long day. The road is quiet. Your mind is somewhere between the events of the day and the comfort of getting home. Then suddenly, red and blue lights flash in your rearview mirror. Your heart rate jumps. You pull over to the side of the road. The engine idles quietly. You grip the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. In the mirror, you see the police officer step out of the patrol car and walk toward your vehicle. There's a moment of silence before the officer reaches your window. Then the officer leans slightly closer and asks a question that millions of drivers have heard before. Do you know why I stopped you? It's such a simple sentence, only 7 words. Yet those 7 words have confused, surprised, and even trapped drivers for decades. In that moment, many people panic. Some try to guess, others immediately apologize. Some attempt to explain themselves before the officer has even said another word. But here's the fascinating part. That question isn't random. It isn't casual conversation. And in many cases, it isn't even the real reason the officer approached your window in the first place. So here's the question I want you to think about for a moment. If a police officer asked you right now, "Do you know why I stopped you?" What would you say? Would you guess the reason? Would you apologize immediately? Would you say you're not sure? Or would you stay completely silent? Think about it carefully. And if you want, share your answer in the comments, because the way people respond to this question reveals something very interesting about human psychology. What most drivers don't realize is that this single question sits at the intersection of psychology, law enforcement training, and legal strategy. To understand why police ask this question so often, we need to step back and look at how traffic stops actually work. Every year, in countries around the world, police conduct tens of millions of traffic stops. In the United States alone, researchers estimate that there are more than 20 million traffic stops annually. For many officers, traffic stops are one of the most routine parts of the job. They enforce speed limits, investigate potential violations, check for impaired driving, and sometimes detect much more serious crimes. But every traffic stop begins the same way. Lights, a pullover, a brief walk to the driver's window, and then a conversation. That conversation is not random. Police officers are trained to observe behavior from the very first moment they interact with a driver. Body language, tone of voice, eye contact, nervousness, consistency of answers. All of these small details can help an officer form a quick assessment of the situation, and that's where the famous question comes in. Do you know why I stopped you? On the surface, it sounds polite, almost conversational. But from a communication perspective, it is actually a very strategic question. There are several reasons officers ask it. The first reason involves human psychology. When people believe they may have done something wrong, they often reveal more information than necessary. This is a well-documented phenomenon in behavioral science. When confronted with authority, many individuals feel pressure to explain themselves quickly. In fact, studies of interrogation techniques have repeatedly shown that open-ended questions encourage people to talk more freely. And when people talk freely, they sometimes reveal useful information without realizing it. Consider a simple example. A driver may respond by saying something like, "I'm sorry, I know I was going a little fast." At that moment, the driver has essentially confirmed the suspected violation before the officer even mentions it. From a legal standpoint, that statement becomes an admission. Another driver might say, "Was it because I didn't signal when I changed lanes?" Again, the driver has now suggested a possible traffic violation on their own. Even if that wasn't the original reason for the stop, the statement can become part of the interaction. This is why many defense attorneys advise drivers to be careful about guessing the reason for a traffic stop. Not because drivers should be disrespectful or uncooperative, but because guessing often leads to unnecessary admissions. But psychology is only one part of the story. The second reason officers ask this question relates to communication. Traffic stops can be tense. Officers must approach vehicles without knowing who the driver is, what their intentions might be, or what situation they may encounter. Because of that uncertainty, officers are trained to establish verbal control of the interaction early in the stop. Asking a question is a way to begin that interaction in a structured way. It invites the driver to speak while allowing the officer to evaluate the driver's response. Sometimes the answer reveals something important. A calm, clear response might indicate that the driver understands the situation and is cooperative. But if a driver responds with extreme nervousness, conflicting explanations, or evasive answers, it may raise additional questions for the officer. Again, this does not automatically mean someone has done anything wrong. Nervousness during traffic stops is extremely common, but officers are trained to observe patterns. They look for behaviors that stand out from the normal range of reactions they see during hundreds of stops, and that initial question helps begin that observation process. There is also a third reason this question appears so frequently during traffic stops. It relates to documentation and enforcement. When officers stop a vehicle, they often need to determine how aware the driver was of the violation. For example, if a driver openly acknowledges speeding or another violation, it may influence how the officer handles the situation. Some officers might issue a warning, others might issue a citation. In some cases, the driver's attitude and honesty can play a role in that decision. Again, this varies widely depending on local laws, department policies, and the circumstances of the stop, but the conversation at the window often shapes how the rest of the encounter unfolds. Now, here is where things become especially interesting. Over the years, legal experts and defense attorneys have debated how drivers should respond to this question. Many lawyers emphasize something important. Drivers generally have the right to remain polite and cooperative while avoiding unnecessary admissions. For example, a driver might respond with something simple like, "I'm not sure, officer." This type of response answers the question without making assumptions. It also avoids guessing about possible violations. At the same time, it maintains a respectful tone, which is usually the best approach during any interaction with law enforcement. Because regardless of legal rights, respectful communication helps keep the encounter calm and professional. It's also important to understand that traffic stop laws vary by country, state, and jurisdiction. Drivers are typically required to provide identification, driver's license, registration, and proof of insurance when requested. Beyond those basic requirements, conversations may vary depending on local legal standards. That's why legal professionals often recommend that drivers familiarize themselves with the laws in their own area. Understanding the rules can make encounters with law enforcement smoother and less stressful. But let's pause for a moment and think about something deeper. Why does this simple question affect people so strongly? Part of the answer lies in how humans respond to authority. Psychologists have studied authority interactions for decades. When someone wearing a uniform asks a question, most people feel a natural urge to answer immediately, even if they are uncertain, even if they feel nervous, even if answering quickly may not be in their best interest. This reaction is deeply rooted in social behavior. From childhood, people are taught to respond quickly when authority figures ask questions. Teachers, parents, supervisors, law enforcement. Because of that conditioning, many drivers feel compelled to explain themselves the moment the question is asked. But in reality, taking a calm moment to respond thoughtfully is usually a better approach. Think about your own experiences for a moment. Have you ever been asked a question unexpectedly and answered too quickly, only to realize later that you said more than you intended? Most people have. And that's exactly why the question, "Do you know why I stopped you?" remains one of the most effective conversation starters during traffic stops. It invites the driver to participate in the interaction. It encourages spontaneous responses, and sometimes those responses reveal more than the driver expected. Over the years, there have been countless real examples illustrating this dynamic. In many recorded traffic stops shared publicly for educational purposes, drivers often begin explaining multiple possible mistakes before the officer even mentions the actual reason for the stop. Some drivers talk about speeding, others mention texting, some apologize repeatedly without knowing the specific issue. From a storytelling perspective, it's fascinating to watch how people react differently under pressure. Some remain calm and composed, others become anxious. Some try to joke, some attempt long explanations. Each response tells the officer something about the person behind the wheel. But here's another question worth considering. What would happen if officers never asked this question at all? Imagine every traffic stop began with a direct statement instead. "Good evening. I stopped you because you were driving 15 miles per hour over the speed limit." That approach is straightforward, and many officers do begin stops this way. But asking the driver first often reveals useful information about the driver's awareness of their behavior. If the driver immediately says, "Yes, I realize I was speeding," the officer knows the driver is aware of the situation. If the driver says, "No, I'm not sure," the officer may simply explain the reason. The key point is that the question opens the conversation, and once the conversation begins, the interaction can move forward. Of course, traffic stops are not only about traffic violations. Historically, many serious criminal investigations have also begun with routine stops. Stolen vehicles, impaired driving, outstanding warrants, illegal transportation of contraband. Because of this, officers are trained to remain alert during every stop, even when the original reason appears minor. That's another reason communication matters so much. The conversation allows officers to gather information while maintaining a professional interaction with the driver, but it also reminds us of something important. Traffic stops are a two-way interaction. The officer observes the driver observes the officer. Both individuals are trying to understand the situation in real time, and most of the time, these interactions end quickly and peacefully. A warning, a citation, or sometimes simply a brief explanation before the driver continues on their way. Yet that one question continues to echo through countless roadside encounters. Do you know why I stopped you? By now, you may be seeing it in a different light. It's not just a casual question. It's a psychological tool, a communication strategy, a method of gathering information, and sometimes a test of how drivers respond under pressure. But here's one final thought to consider. The next time you see those flashing lights in your mirror and you hear that familiar question, remember that the moment doesn't need to become stressful or chaotic. Taking a breath, staying calm, and responding respectfully can make the interaction smoother for everyone involved. Because ultimately, the goal of most traffic stops is simple: safety, safer roads, safer drivers, safer communities. And the brief conversation that begins with that famous question is often just the first step toward resolving the situation. So now that you understand the deeper reasons behind it, I'm curious about your perspective. Have you ever been asked this question during a traffic stop? How did you respond? And looking back, would you answer differently now? Share your experience in the comments, because understanding how these everyday interactions work can help everyone approach them with a little more awareness, a little more confidence, and a lot less confusion the next time those flashing lights appear in the mirror.